From IT to Farm Queen, the beginning of the end. Shelby Harris Kent sat in the corner of the funeral home, her hands clutching the folded handkerchief in her lap. The faint smell of lilies lingered in the air, blending with the soft murmur of condolences. Her grandmother's photograph rested on an easel at the front of the room, framed by wreaths of white roses. She looked regal, even in a photo, with her soft silver hair perfectly styled and her kind smile frozen in time. The world felt heavier without her. Her grandmother had been her rock, her family, and the last living tie to her parents, who had passed away when Shelby was just a teenager. Now, Shelby felt untethered, floating aimlessly in a sea of grief. Kyle Kent, her husband of 3 years, stood by her side, but his comforting act felt hollow. He wore his charming smile like a mask, shaking hands and accepting condolences on Shelby's behalf. To the outside world, he was the perfect, supportive husband. But Shelby could feel the chill beneath his surface warmth, a distance that had been growing between them for months. When the will was read, Shelby barely processed the words. The bulk of the inheritance she had expected was modest: 200 acres of countryside land and an old house she hadn't visited in years. She nodded absently, accepting the papers from the lawyer. It didn't matter to her. She wasn't interested in wealth. She only wanted her grandmother back. Later that evening, Kyle broke the fragile quiet in their car. "So, about the house," he began, his voice too casual. "What do you plan to do with it?" Shelby looked out the window, the city lights blurring as they drove past. "I don't know," she said softly. "I haven't thought about it." "You should sell it," Kyle pressed. "You could make a fortune on the land alone." Something inside her twisted. She turned to him, her voice firmer than she expected. "I'm not selling it. It was Grandma's. I don't know what I'll do with it, but I'm not ready to let it go." Kyle's jaw tightened, and for a moment, the charm cracked. "You're being emotional," he said with an edge to his voice. "You don't even want the place." Shelby didn't reply. A quiet instinct told her to hold on to it, even if she didn't understand why. That instinct, she would later realize, was her first step toward reclaiming her life. Cracks beneath the surface. The condo was quiet that evening, save for the soft hum of the television in the living room. Shelby sat on the couch with her laptop balanced on her knees, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Coding always had a way of calming her, the neatness of logic and problem solving providing clarity she often lacked in her personal life. Kyle sat across from her, scrolling through his phone. His expression was distant, his jaw set in the way it always was when he was irritated but unwilling to say why. "Another trip coming up?" he asked casually, breaking the silence. Shelby nodded. "Seattle, next week. Just a few meetings and a conference." Kyle's lips curved into a thin smile. "Must be nice to jet around on the company dime." The comment stung, though Shelby didn't show it. "It's work, Kyle, not a vacation." He didn't respond, but his silence said enough. This had become their pattern: icy remarks, followed by long stretches of tension. Shelby had always been mild-mannered, preferring to avoid conflict, but lately, the cracks in their relationship were impossible to ignore. When she left for her trip, Shelby carried an uneasy feeling with her. It wasn't just Kyle's behavior, it was the way her instincts whispered that something wasn't right. She had long suspected that Kyle's affections were surface deep, his charm more performative than genuine. But it wasn't until she returned from Seattle a day early that the truth confronted her in the most blatant way possible. Shelby opened the door to the condo and froze. The living room was in disarray, boxes scattered across the floor, drawers emptied, and items piled haphazardly. For a moment, she thought they had been robbed. But then she heard voices from the bedroom. Her heart pounded as she walked down the hallway. The door was ajar, and she pushed it open to find Kyle packing a suitcase. A woman stood beside him, holding a pile of his shirts. "Oh, look who's here," the woman said, her voice dripping with disdain. "The wifey Kyle turned, his face darkening when he saw Shelby. You're back early. Shelby ignored the mistress and focused on Kyle. What's going on? Kyle shrugged, his movements casual, though his tone was anything but. I'm leaving. This isn't working. Shelby's stomach churned, but she forced herself to stay calm. You couldn't have told me that instead of packing while I was gone? Kyle sneered. Why? So you could cry and beg me to stay. Save it, Shelby. This marriage has been over for a while. The woman laughed, a sharp, grating sound. Oh, honey, you're better off. Trust me. Shelby's eyes flicked to her. I don't remember asking for your opinion. Kyle stepped between them, his voice rising. Don't you dare talk to her like that. Shelby's anger bubbled to the surface, but she kept her voice steady. I'm not the one who disrespected this marriage, Kyle. You are. His expression twisted into something cruel. This marriage was a mistake. I only married you because I thought you were some rich princess. Turns out all you inherited was a pile of old wood in the middle of nowhere. Shelby blinked, the words cutting deeper than she expected. She had suspected he didn't love her, but hearing his disdain laid bare was a different kind of pain. Still, she refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing her crumble. Thank you for your honesty, she said, her voice calm. Now I know exactly who you are. Kyle scowled. You think you're so smart, don't you? You've always been too independent, too cold. You're not even fun to be around. Funny, Shelby replied, her tone icy. I could say the same about you. The mistress smirked. Well, this has been fun, but we've got places to be. Kyle glared at Shelby. You've got a week to get your stuff out. I sold the condo. Shelby felt the world tilt beneath her, but she gritted her teeth and nodded. Fine, I'll be gone. She walked out of the room, her chest tight with a mix of anger and grief. As she closed the door behind her, she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't going to let Kyle or anyone else dictate her life anymore. New beginnings. Shelby leaned against the counter in her hotel room, sipping lukewarm coffee and staring at the city skyline. Her belongings were in storage, her home was no longer hers, and Kyle was nothing more than a name in the legal documents her lawyer was filing. Everything had changed so fast that Shelby barely had time to process it. The sharp pang of betrayal from Kyle's affair was slowly giving way to a quieter realization. She had been unhappy for years. His affair wasn't the beginning of the end. It was just the final, undeniable sign that she needed a fresh start. 2 months later, the couple found themselves together again. The divorce hearing had been draining. Shelby sat across from Kyle in the courtroom, wondering how things had deteriorated so completely. 4.5 years ago, he had been the ambitious real estate broker who chased her relentlessly after they met during an IT security audit at his company. Back then, she had been impressed by his drive and charm, his determination to win her over. Now, sitting across from him, all she saw was a man desperate to claw at anything he could get from her. Kyle's lawyer had made ridiculous claims, including a stake in her inheritance, knowing they couldn't touch the small trust left to her by her parents. He argued that as Shelby's husband, Kyle was entitled to half of the land her grandmother had left her. Thankfully, the law disagreed. The inheritance was protected, no matter how loudly Kyle huffed and puffed. When that failed, Kyle tried another tactic, offering to buy into the property as an investor. Shelby had barely managed to suppress her laughter. I'm not selling, she had said firmly, her voice steady, and I certainly don't need your money. The condo, the one thing of significant value they'd shared, had always been in Kyle's name. There was nothing he could offer her, nothing she wanted. By the time the judge ruled that neither party would walk away with anything from the other, Kyle's face was a mix of frustration and fury. Outside the courthouse, he had stormed off without a word, leaving Shelby to reflect on how much had changed. She had been so blinded by love, or what she thought was love, that she had ignored the warning signs. Kyle's charm once endearing, had turned manipulative. His ambition had morphed into greed. She had stayed too long, hoping he might revert to the man she thought she married. But there was no going back. Standing on the courthouse steps, Shelby breathed in the crisp air and let the past slip from her shoulders like a heavy coat she no longer needed. Her phone buzzed on the table. A text from Chaz. Meet me at Perch? Drinks on me? Shelby arrived at Perch, a trendy rooftop bar introduced to her a year ago by Chaz Kindle, her best friend since high school. The place was buzzing with people, but her friend stood out, leaning casually against the bar in his chef whites, a grin spreading across his face when he saw her. There she is, Chaz said, pulling her into a bear hug. I ordered you a G&T. You need it. Shelby smiled despite herself. Thanks, you're not wrong. They settled into a corner booth, the city lights twinkling below them. Chaz handed her the drink and raised his own glass. To your divorce and leaving that loser in the dust. Shelby clinked her glass against his. Cheers to that. So, Chaz said, leaning forward, what's next for you? Please don't say you're staying in that depressing hotel for much longer. I don't know, Shelby admitted. It's been a lot. I need time to figure things out, but I don't want to commit to even a short apartment lease. Chaz tilted his head. What about that house your grandma left you, the one in the middle of nowhere? Shelby laughed softly. You mean the farmhouse surrounded by trees and absolutely no people? Sounds like a dream. Don't knock it, Chaz said, smirking. You're always complaining about traffic and noise. Plus, you could reinvent yourself as the mysterious IT farmer. Grow some veggies, make a fortune selling artisanal eggs, and scare off tourists. Shelby rolled her eyes. It's not a bad idea, except for the farming part. I don't know the first thing about it. Chaz shrugged. Hire people. Get a goat. Name it Kyle. I'll visit every month and make sure you're not growing mushrooms in the bathtub. They both laughed, and for the first time in weeks, Shelby felt lighter. Later that night, back in her hotel room, Shelby couldn't stop thinking about the house. It wasn't completely isolated. There was the nearby town, Kirby, with shops and amenities. It was close enough to civilization to feel manageable, but far enough to offer her a fresh start. She pulled up the photos of the property on her laptop. The house was old but beautiful, with wide windows and a wraparound porch. The land stretched out in every direction, dotted with trees, and, to her surprise, a small lake, reflecting the sky like a mirror. Shelby closed her laptop with a deep breath. Maybe Chaz was on to something. Maybe this house, her grandmother's legacy, was the new beginning she needed. By the end of the week, she had packed her things, hired movers, and arranged for utilities to be turned on at the farmhouse. It was time to embrace the unknown. Finding home. The drive to the farmhouse was a winding journey through rolling hills and quiet country roads. As Shelby pulled up to the property, she was struck by the serene beauty of the land. The house stood at the center of 200 acres, surrounded by sprawling fields, a scattering of old oaks, and a glistening small lake tucked just beyond the tree line. The lake reflected the late afternoon sunlight, its surface shimmering like liquid gold. The house itself was large, but weathered, with its white paint peeling in places and ivy creeping up one side. The wraparound porch, though slightly sagging, had a charm that made Shelby smile. Her grandmother had always spoken of this house with fondness, calling it Bernice, like an old friend. Standing there now, Shelby felt a pang of connection to her grandmother and a flicker of hope for what this place could become. She stepped inside and was immediately hit by the musty smell of a house that had been empty for years. The wooden floors creaked under her feet, and dust motes danced in the sunlight, streaming through the tall windows. The rooms were spacious, with high ceilings and ornate moldings that spoke of another era. In the kitchen, she ran her fingers over the farmhouse sink and imagined what it might look like, fully restored. Over the next few weeks, Shelby threw herself into the task of renovating Bernice. She hired a team of cleaners to clear out the years of grime and cobwebs, as well as plumbers and electricians to modernize the house. Jeff Franklin, the local handyman and owner of the hardware store, became a regular fixture at the farmhouse. "This place has good bones," Jeff said one afternoon as he worked on fixing the porch railing. "Your grandma knew what she was doing when she held on to it." "I hope so," Shelby replied, handing him a glass of lemonade. She appreciated Jeff's straightforward kindness. He had a warm smile and an easygoing manner that made the chaos of renovation feel less overwhelming. Shelby decided to turn the attic into her bedroom and office. It was the largest space in the house, with vaulted ceilings, a wide dormer window overlooking the lake, and its own ensuite bathroom. As she painted the walls a soft lavender and set up her computer by the window, she started to feel like she was carving out a space that was truly hers. While overseeing the renovations, Shelby maintained a careful balance between her new rural life and her professional expertise. She continued to take on select IT security projects remotely, her skills in high demand, even from her farmhouse in the countryside. The work kept her sharp and provided a steady, satisfactory income, allowing her to invest in the farm without financial strain. Shelby found comfort in the familiar rhythm of coding and troubleshooting, retreating to her attic turned office to meet deadlines and correspond with clients. It was a reminder of her past life. Yet now, the rewards felt different, like she was building something more meaningful beyond the paycheck. In between managing the renovations, Shelby ventured into town to stock up on supplies and get to know the local community. The town, nestled at the foot of the mountains, was picturesque with its cobblestone streets, boutique shops, and historic buildings. She discovered that it was a popular tourist destination, thanks to its proximity to natural hot springs and hiking trails. At the bakery, she met Mrs. Green, a cheerful woman in her 60s who insisted that Shelby try the apple pie. At the general store, she struck up a conversation with Tom Williams, a musician and local farmer, who offered her advice on gardening and recommended local art and music spots. Each interaction made her feel more at home. One afternoon, as she was leaving the hardware store, Jeff caught up with her. "Have you thought about planting anything yet?" Shelby laughed. "I'm barely keeping up with the house. The thought of growing my own food sounds like a disaster waiting to happen." "Start small," Jeff suggested. "Herbs, maybe, then move on to tomatoes. You've got the land for it, and it's not as hard as you think." Shelby nodded thoughtfully. "Maybe I'll give it a shot. If I fail, I'll blame you." Jeff grinned. "Fair enough." As the weeks turned into months, Shelby's farmhouse began to transform. The once dusty rooms were now bright and inviting, filled with secondhand furniture she'd refinished herself. The lake became her favorite spot to relax, especially in the evenings when the setting sun painted the water in shades of pink and orange. She started experimenting with gardening, planting a small patch of herbs and tomatoes near the back porch. To her surprise, the plants began to thrive. Chaz visited every few weeks, bringing his trademark humor and a seemingly endless supply of culinary ideas. "You know," he said one evening over dinner, "you could turn this into a full-fledged operation. Farm-to-table dinners are all the rage, and you've got the perfect setup." "You're insane," Shelby replied, though the idea lingered in her mind long after Chaz had left. In 6 months, Shelby had poured her heart into renovating Bernice, restoring the farmhouse's charm with modern upgrades that honored its history. Every room reflected her vision, from the lavender-painted attic, turned cozy retreat, to the updated kitchen designed for gatherings. With the house now a true home, Shelby looked ahead with resolve, eager to become a better steward of the land that was her birthright and ready to nurture its potential. A new leaf. Shelby stood at the edge of her wraparound porch, gazing out at the gentle ripples of the lake in the distance. The early morning sunlight glinted off the water, painting the landscape in shades of gold and green. It was peaceful, something she had rarely experienced during her years in the city. Yet, as tranquil as the countryside was, a small voice in her head reminded her of something she couldn't shake. She didn't know anyone here. When she had lived in Atlanta, Shelby had always been too busy. Her neighbors had been familiar faces in passing, but she had never learned their names. The realization stung now that she was alone, with no family left. Her grandmother's absence left an aching void, and Shelby felt a deep need to fill it, not with noise, but with meaningful connections. She wanted to live differently this time, to belong, to contribute, to be part of something bigger than herself. The question was, where to start? Shelby found her answer one Tuesday morning when she stopped by Mrs. Green's bakery in downtown Kirby. The scent of fresh bread and warm pastries greeted her as she stepped inside, but instead of the usual serene atmosphere, chaos reigned. Mrs. Green, a petite woman with graying hair pinned into a neat bun, was rushing between the kitchen and the counter, her face flushed with stress. Cynthia's water broke, Mrs. Green exclaimed, barely pausing to acknowledge Shelby. Keith had to take her to the hospital. I'm short-staffed, and I have a big order to finish. I can't manage the front and the baking at the same time. Shelby hesitated, then stepped forward. Let me help. I can handle the counter. Mrs. Green stopped in her tracks, her eyes narrowing. Do you even know how to work a cash register? I was a cashier and salesperson all through college, Shelby said with a small smile, and I recognize your system. It's old, but I've used one before. After a moment's hesitation, Mrs. Green relented. All right, but don't let the line get out of hand. For the rest of the day, Shelby manned the counter like a seasoned pro. She chatted with customers, many of whom were surprised to see a new face. When she explained the situation, their admiration for her willingness to help was clear. By mid-afternoon, Mrs. Green had finished her order, and the bakery hummed with a steady rhythm once more. That evening, the two women sat at a small table near the kitchen, sharing tea and leftover pastries. Thank you, Shelby, Mrs. Green said, her voice warm. You saved me today. Shelby smiled, brushing a stray crumb off her shirt. I was happy to help. It's nice to feel useful. As they talked, Shelby learned that Mrs. Green's husband, Bill, was a retired doctor, and the couple had three grown children, twins in college, and an oldest son working in the nearby city. Though their lives were different, Shelby felt a kinship with Mrs. Green's humor and practical nature. When Shelby shared her story, her grandmother's passing, her divorce, and her decision to start fresh, Mrs. Green nodded with approval. It's brave, what you're doing, she said. If you ever need anything, you know where to find me. Mrs. Green suggested that Shelby contact the local high school principal, Leonard Lopez, who was always looking for volunteers. Inspired by the idea, Shelby resolved to do something nice for Mrs. Green in return, should the opportunity arise. Shelby emailed Mr. Lopez the next day, attaching her resume and explaining her background. His reply came quickly. Your IT experience is exactly what we need. Would you be willing to host bi-monthly seminars for our STEM club? Though the idea of teaching teenagers made her nervous, Shelby agreed. She spent hours researching fun, approachable IT projects to share with the students. The first seminar had only 5 attendees, but the small group put Shelby at ease. She showed them how to design basic games and explained how artificial intelligence could personalize video game experiences. Her dry humor and surprising knowledge of teenage slang won them over, and word spread. By the third seminar, the club had tripled in size. When Shelby and one of the science teachers proposed a field trip to Georgia Tech, the students' enthusiasm was infectious. Seeing their excitement reminded her of how rewarding it felt to make a difference, something she'd rarely experienced in her old life. Over time, Shelby's involvement in the community began to transform her. She realized how much she had missed by living on the periphery of life, too focused on her career and marriage to connect with those around her. Helping Mrs. Green and volunteering at the high school gave Shelby a sense of purpose she hadn't known she needed. It wasn't just about giving back, it was about becoming part of something larger, finding a place where she belonged. As she stood by the lake one evening, watching the stars reflect in the still water, Shelby thought about what she might have missed if she had stayed in Atlanta, married to Kyle. The loneliness, the emptiness of that life seemed so far away now. For the first time in years, she felt whole. Cultivating success. Shelby stood on the porch of Bernice, her hands resting on her hips as she surveyed the farm. The once overgrown fields were now neatly divided into sections, each one brimming with potential. Rows of tomatoes, strawberries, and herbs had started to flourish, and the grapevines she'd planted with Jeff's guidance were beginning to stretch across their wire trellises. But getting to this point had been anything but easy. Shelby had faced more challenges than she could have imagined when she first arrived. The first major hurdle had been the soil. It turned out that parts of the land were too rocky or nutrient poor to support crops. Shelby spent hours researching soil improvement techniques, eventually deciding to bring in compost and organic fertilizers. Tom, taking on the role of mentor, pitched in by connecting her with a local supplier who provided high quality compost at a discounted rate. University graduate students also helped by testing the soil and advising her on crop rotation strategies to prevent further depletion. Shelby offered them paid internships, and a few temporarily lived on site. Bernice was certainly large enough to accommodate them. Next came the water issues. While the lake provided a beautiful backdrop, it wasn't a reliable source for irrigation. The existing well on the property was old and inefficient, leading to constant breakdowns. Jeff took it upon himself to fix the well temporarily, while Shelby worked with a local plumber to install a new irrigation system. The students pitched in by setting up rainwater collection barrels to supplement the water supply, ensuring that the crops wouldn't suffer during dry spells. As these challenges piled up, one of the university students, Mia, suggested looking into hydroponics as a way to save the fields that couldn't support traditional crops. Intrigued, Shelby dove into research, spending late nights learning about hydroponic systems and their potential. With the help of the students, she erected a large greenhouse on the property, designed specifically to house the hydroponics project. Inside, they set up vertical growing systems for leafy greens and herbs, as well as a dedicated section for strawberries. The greenhouse quickly became a game changer. It allowed Shelby to grow crops year round, independent of soil quality and weather conditions. The hydroponic setup used water far more efficiently than traditional irrigation, solving some of the farm's lingering water issues. As the first harvest of hydroponic produce rolled in, Shelby felt a surge of pride, knowing she'd turned an obstacle into an opportunity. Pests were another unexpected challenge. Shelby's first attempts at growing strawberries ended with half the crop devoured by insects. Frustrated but determined, she turned to online forums and YouTube videos to learn about natural pest control methods. She enlisted the help of Jackson, one of her farmhands, who suggested planting marigolds to deter pests and introducing ladybugs to the garden. Within weeks, the strawberry patch was thriving again. Shelby also struggled with the sheer volume of work required to maintain the farm. Even with the students and a few farmhands helping, there were days when it felt like she was barely keeping her head above water. That's when the townspeople stepped in. Mrs. Green organized a weekend volunteer day, rallying a group of locals to help Shelby weed the fields, paint the barn, and repair fences. Their generosity and camaraderie reminded Shelby that she wasn't alone in this journey. As the farm grew, so did Shelby's need for a clear vision. Shelby's crops began to flourish, and she realized she needed a streamlined way to distribute her produce without taking on the role of a full-time salesperson. The idea of knocking on doors and pitching her farm to restaurants felt daunting and time-consuming, especially with so much work still to be done on the farm. Chaz introduced her to his friend Mason, a produce broker with a strong network of restaurants in Atlanta. Mason specialized in sourcing high-quality organic produce for fine dining establishments, and Shelby's farm quickly impressed him. Within weeks, he had secured contracts with several prominent chefs who valued her fresh, sustainably grown fruits and vegetables. Working with Mason gave Shelby peace of mind. The broker handled the logistics and sales, allowing her to focus on managing the farm itself. You do what you're great at, growing amazing produce, Mason told her during one of their calls. Leave the marketing and distribution to me. The arrangement kept the farm financially solvent, providing a steady income stream that allowed Shelby to invest in new projects, like expanding the hydroponics greenhouse. And, despite the physical distance, it felt satisfying to know her hard work was feeding people in her old city, bridging the gap between her past and present life. Chaz had also mentioned the idea of hosting a farm to table dinner during one of his visits, and at first, Shelby had dismissed it as too ambitious. But after a particularly successful harvest, she began to see the potential. She and Chaz spent weeks planning the event, with Chaz taking charge of the menu and Shelby handling logistics. The day of the dinner was a whirlwind of activity. Long wooden tables were set up near the lake, adorned with wildflower centerpieces and soft string lights. The menu, crafted entirely by Chaz, featured dishes made from Shelby's produce, roasted tomato soup, herb crusted chicken, and strawberry shortcake for dessert. Despite a few hiccups, including a brief power outage that threatened to delay dinner, the event was a resounding success. Guests raved about the food, the atmosphere, and the unique opportunity to dine on a working farm. By the end of the night, Shelby had already received inquiries about future dinners. Within a month, there was a 3-month waiting list for the next event. Shelby's journey wasn't without its frustrations, but each challenge she faced made her more resourceful and resilient. Her collaboration with the university students led to innovative solutions over time, like solar-powered irrigation and composting systems. By the end of the second year, the hydroponics greenhouse had become a cornerstone of the farm's operations, proving that modern techniques could complement traditional farming. Her farmhands and the townspeople's support helped her tackle large projects that would have been impossible on her own, and her late-night research sessions equipped her with the knowledge to address problems she never thought she'd encounter. By the end of her second year, Shelby's innovative efforts had transformed the farm into a thriving, sustainable operation. From hydroponics to solar-powered irrigation, her creative solutions had turned challenges into triumphs, making the farm a beacon of modern agriculture and a source of personal pride. The last laugh. By the middle of her third year, Shelby's farm was thriving beyond her wildest dreams. What had once been a daunting project was now a bustling operation, with a dedicated team, innovative farming techniques, and a growing reputation. The hydroponics greenhouse was producing a steady supply of leafy greens and herbs, while the fields yielded abundant crops of tomatoes, strawberries, and potatoes. Her website, which featured an online shop and blog posts about sustainable farming, was drawing attention from across the state. The farm-to-table dinners had become a hallmark of Shelby's success. Held once a month, these events brought together locals, tourists, and food enthusiasts to enjoy fresh, seasonal meals by the lake. Chaz's culinary genius turned Shelby's produce into unforgettable dishes, and live bands provided a festive atmosphere, including Tom's own Barnyard Blues Band. Guests often arrived hours early to stroll the property, admire the lake, and take photos of the picturesque setting. Each dinner was sold out months in advance, and the waiting list continued to grow. Shelby found herself juggling the demands of running the farm with coordinating these events, but she couldn't deny the joy they brought her. Watching guests laugh, dance, and savor the fruits of her labor was deeply fulfilling. On this particular evening, the dinner was in full swing. The tables near the lake were decorated with wildflowers and soft string lights, and the warm hum of conversation mixed with the gentle melodies of the live band. Shelby moved through the crowd, greeting guests and ensuring everything was running smoothly. She spotted Chaz in his chef's whites, directing his team in the makeshift outdoor kitchen. Jeff was helping set up additional tables to accommodate a last-minute surge of attendees. Busy night, Jeff said as he passed her, carrying a stack of chairs. Shelby nodded. They seem to get busier every month. I'm starting to think we need a bigger space. Jeff grinned. Or more hours in the day. As the evening unfolded, Shelby moved between the guests, making sure everyone felt welcome. She stopped to chat with a group of locals who had attended every dinner since the beginning and exchanged a few words with a family visiting from out of town. The warm, communal energy of the night made all the hard work worthwhile. But as she made her way back toward the kitchen, Shelby's heart skipped a beat. At one of the tables was a man she hadn't seen in years, Kyle. Beside him was a woman who could only be his mistress, Karen, if Shelby remembered correctly. Kyle and Karen were seated near the center of the main dining area. Karen's body language radiated discomfort, her glances sharp and accusatory towards Kyle. He, on the other hand, seemed captivated by the transformation of the farm, his eyes sweeping over the lake, the glowing string lights, and the bustling tables. Shelby's initial shock quickly gave way to determination. Shelby took a steadying breath and decided to stay professional. She straightened her shoulders and approached the table, keeping her expression polite but cool. Kyle, she said, her voice steady, I didn't expect to see you here. Kyle's eyes widened briefly before he plastered on a smile and complimented, Shelby, this is quite a setup you have here. Karen, determined not to go unnoticed, chimed in. I had no idea this was your farm. I made the reservation months ago as a surprise. Some of our friends raved about it, and I knew we had to make it out here. What a small world. Karen nestled closer to Kyle, her long red nails gripping his arm possessively, oblivious to how clearly her insecurity showed. Shelby's lips curved into a tight smile. Yes, small world indeed. I hope you enjoy the evening. She then moved on to greet other guests warmly and made her rounds, avoiding their table and Kyle's attempts to catch her eye. But as the evening wore on, Kyle became more obvious, and Karen's irritation grew palpable, her clipped tone and narrowed eyes making her displeasure clear to anyone paying attention. Finally, as dessert was being served, Kyle managed to corner Shelby near the edge of the lake. She'd been checking on the placement of extra chairs when his voice stopped her. Shelby, he said, his tone filled with feigned warmth. This place, it's unbelievable. I mean, I always knew you were capable, but this is something else. Shelby turned to face him, her expression calm but guarded. Thank you, Kyle. I'm glad you're enjoying yourself. Kyle stepped closer, lowering his voice. I'm serious. You've really outdone yourself, and it's got me thinking, maybe we could work together. I know people, Shelby. I could help you take this to the next level. I have ideas, connections. We could expand this farm into something even bigger. Imagine what we could accomplish. Shelby raised an eyebrow. Expand? Kyle, you tried to take this farm from me in the divorce. You're the reason I had to fight so hard to keep it in the first place. And now you think you can just walk back in and act like none of that happened? I think I'm doing just fine on my own. Kyle's smile faltered. I'm just saying we had something good once. We could have it again. Shelby's voice hardened. No, Kyle. What we had wasn't good. It was safe, and I stayed with you longer than I should have because it was easy to hide behind you. But you did me a favor. By cheating and divorcing me, you forced me to confront my fears and build a life that actually means something. And for that, I thank you. Kyle's expression darkened slightly. You were holding out, weren't you? These were your plans all along. You just wanted to cut me out. Shelby's smile faded, replaced by a look of quiet resolve. You really think this is about you? Kyle's jaw tightened when Shelby laughed, the sound sharp and incredulous. You know, Kyle, looking back, it's all so clear now. Even when we were together, your so called friends would roll their eyes at your bragging and snicker behind your back. I used to think they were just being cruel, but now I see they were right. You never earned their respect because you never stood for anything. You built your life around appearances, chasing shallow victories and meaningless status symbols. You never had the courage to grow into someone real, someone worth admiring. And Karen? She's just another reflection of your hollow ambitions, so lacking in self respect and morals that she was willing to cling to a married man. The desperation is honestly sad. You two truly belong together. You're not the person I thought I married, Kyle. You're just empty. Kyle's face flushed with fury, his mouth opening as if ready to hurl a retort, when Karen suddenly appeared, her expression a mix of confusion and anger. She had clearly caught the tail end of Shelby's words, and the sight of them alone together only heightened her agitation. What the hell is going on here? She demanded sharply, her glare darting between the two of them. Shelby turned to her, her tone cool. Kyle was just suggesting we work together again. Interesting, isn't it? Karen's face twisted in fury as she rounded on Kyle. You? You're trying to get back with her? After everything? Without waiting for an answer, she slapped him hard across the face. You're unbelievable. I'm so done with you. She stormed off toward the parking lot, her heels clicking angrily on the gravel. Kyle hesitated for a moment, casting one last furious look at Shelby before running after Karen, pleading for forgiveness. Shelby turned back toward the dinner, her cheeks warm as she realized several guests, along with Chaz and some of the staff, had witnessed the entire exchange. Chaz approached her with a glass of wine in hand, his grin wide and unapologetic. Well, he said, I'd say that's the best entertainment we've had all night. To Shelby's surprise, a few guests began clapping, their applause spreading through the crowd. Shelby ducked her head, both embarrassed and amused, but she couldn't stop herself from smiling. For the first time, when it came to Kyle, she truly had the last laugh, embracing the future. The morning after the dramatic farm-to-table dinner, Shelby stood on the porch of Bernice, sipping her coffee as the sun rose over the lake. The water shimmered, and the gentle sounds of birds, waking, filled the air. Despite the chaos Kyle had brought, the farm's tranquility remained unshaken, and Shelby felt a sense of peace she hadn't fully realized the night before. Chaz appeared from the house, yawning and holding a steaming cup of coffee. So, he began, settling into a chair beside her, how does it feel to finally tell that jerk off? Shelby chuckled, her eyes on the horizon. It feels liberating. I didn't realize how much I needed to say those things until they were out in the open. Well, you nailed it, Chaz said with a grin. I think you just became a local legend. Did you see how everyone clapped for you? Shelby smiled, warmth spreading through her chest. I saw. It was a little embarrassing, but it felt good to have that kind of support. As the weeks passed, life at the farm returned to its usual rhythm. The dinner had been a success, despite the unexpected drama, and the waiting list for future events only grew longer. Shelby found herself more energized than ever, pouring her heart into new projects and ideas for the farm. One of her first priorities was expanding the hydroponics greenhouse. With the help of the university students and a grant from an agricultural innovation program, Shelby added additional rows of vertical gardens and experimented with growing rare herbs and exotic vegetables. The greenhouse became a hub of activity, with visitors from neighboring farms and schools coming to learn about her sustainable techniques. Shelby also began organizing more community events on the property. With Chaz's encouragement, she hosted a small harvest festival, complete with games, live music, and a pumpkin patch. The event brought the town together, and Shelby felt a deep sense of connection to her community. She even noticed Jeff sneaking glances at her during the festival, his smile warm and genuine as they worked side by side to ensure everything ran smoothly. One evening, as the sun set over the lake, Jeff appeared at her side. They had spent the day working together to set up a new rainwater collection system, and Shelby felt the familiar comfort of his steady presence. He handed her a glass of lemonade and sat beside her on the porch steps. "This view never gets old," he said, looking out at the shimmering water. After a moment, he glanced at her and smiled. "Neither does working with you, by the way." Shelby laughed softly, her cheeks warming. "Thanks, Jeff. I couldn't have done half of this without your help." Jeff hesitated, then reached for her hand, his touch gentle but firm. "Shelby," he began, his tone uncharacteristically serious. "I've been wanting to say this for a while now. You've built something incredible here, and watching you do it has been inspiring. You're one of the most determined, intelligent, and kind people I've ever met. And, well, I'd like to support you in any way I can, not just with the farm, but with anything you want to do or be. Personally." Shelby's breath caught as she met his gaze. "Jeff," he held up a hand, his expression turning self-deprecating. "Look, I know I'm not some big shot entrepreneur or anything. I own and run the hardware store, which is about as exciting as it sounds. I've had a few relationships, but the last one was a broken engagement. Publicly, she ended it. But the truth is, I didn't want to marry her toward the end. We'd been together since college, and everyone expected us to tie the knot, but we wanted completely different things in life." Shelby squeezed his hand, encouraging him to continue. "Anyway," he said with a sheepish grin, "I've come to terms with the fact that I'm a bit of a throwback at heart. I like working with my hands, being close to nature, and, well, being around you. Shelby, I'm romantically interested in you, but I'm happy to go at your pace. No pressure, no expectations. I just want to be here for you." Shelby's heart swelled as she listened to his words. "Jeff, that's really sweet. I appreciate your honesty. And to be honest, I like having you around too. You make everything feel easier, lighter." Jeff chuckled. "Well, I aim to please, but seriously, Shelby, I mean it. Whether you want to grow this farm into something even bigger or just enjoy what you've built, I'll be here to support you. I'll match whatever pace you set." Shelby smiled, her heart full. "Thank you, Jeff. That means a lot." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the lake, Shelby felt a sense of hope and possibility. For the first time in years, she wasn't just surviving, she was thriving, surrounded by people who truly cared for her, and a future that felt as bright as the stars beginning to dot the sky. New horizons. The months following Jeff's heartfelt confession were some of the happiest Shelby could remember. The rhythm of life on the farm remained steady, but everything felt brighter, more purposeful. Jeff's presence became a comforting constant. Whether he was fixing a fence, helping plan new irrigation systems, or simply sharing a quiet evening by the lake, he was always there, steady, supportive, and kind. The burgeoning romance between Shelby and Jeff didn't go unnoticed by Chaz, who was quick to capitalize on the situation with his trademark wit. "Well, well, well," he teased one afternoon as he caught them exchanging a kiss in her kitchen. "Looks like Mr. Fix-It is hammering his way into more than just repairs around here." Shelby's cheeks heated, and Jeff smirked, shaking his head. "What's next, Shelby? Maybe a private tour of the hardware store for some exclusive tools?" Shelby groaned and threw a dish towel at Chaz, who ducked with a grin. Jeff laughed. "If you keep this up, Chaz, you're going to need your own repairs after Shelby is done with you." Shelby's farm-to-table dinners continued to flourish, attracting attention not only from the local community, but also from regional publications. A lifestyle magazine reached out to feature the farm, its innovative hydroponics greenhouse, and Shelby's story of transformation. The article brought an influx of visitors, and Shelby soon realized that the farm's growing popularity presented both opportunities and challenges. One challenge was parking. The existing gravel lot couldn't handle the increased traffic, and Shelby worried about the impact on her land. Jeff suggested a solution. We could use part of the unused pasture near the greenhouse for an overflow lot. With some landscaping, it could even look nice. With Jeff's help and input from the university students, the overflow lot was created using eco-friendly materials. The team planted native grasses and wildflowers around the edges, turning it into a functional yet beautiful addition to the farm. Shelby also decided to expand her offerings. Inspired by the magazine feature, she launched weekend workshops on sustainable farming and hydroponics, led by her and the university students. The workshops were a hit, drawing small groups of eager participants who were thrilled to learn about farming while enjoying the picturesque surroundings. Chaz was instrumental in these events, often preparing lunches for the attendees and weaving his humor and charm into the sessions. You know, he said one afternoon while plating a spread of sandwiches, this whole thing could be a movie. From IT to Farm Queen? The Shelby Harris story? Shelby laughed. I'll pass on the Hollywood fame, thanks. I'm happy right here. Chaz's contributions to the farm's success extended far beyond the workshops. After years of working as a sous chef in the city, he realized his true dream wasn't to become an executive chef for someone else's restaurant, but to open his own small, stylish eatery. Inspired by his work with Shelby, Chaz also moved to Kirby and opened a cozy eatery that featured locally sourced ingredients, many from Shelby's farm. It's the best of both worlds, Chaz explained one evening as he prepared for the next farm to table dinner. I can still enjoy the energy of the city when I want to, but now I get to live and work in a community that actually feels like home. Plus, these monthly dinners let me stay creative and connected to the farm. It's perfect. To formalize their partnership, Shelby and Chaz set up a contract and branded the event as Dinner with Chaz at Shelby Farms. They even launched a YouTube channel where viewers could watch Chaz prepare the dinners, learn cooking tips, and discover recipes that focused on natural foods and clean eating. The channel quickly gained a loyal following, further cementing the farm's reputation as a hub of innovation and community spirit. As Shelby's connection to the community deepened, so did her relationship with Jeff. One evening, after a particularly successful workshop, they shared dinner on the porch overlooking the lake. The sky was streaked with orange and pink, and the air was warm and fragrant with the scent of fresh cut grass. You've built something incredible here, Jeff said, his voice filled with admiration. Not just the farm, but the community around it. People don't just come here for the food or the workshops, they come because of you. Shelby blushed. It's not just me. I couldn't have done this without you and everyone else who's helped. Jeff reached across the table and took her hand. You're too modest. Shelby, you've turned this place into something special, and I'm grateful every day that I get to be part of it and part of your life. Before Shelby could respond, Jeff stood and gently pulled her into a warm embrace. His arms were strong, enveloping her in a comforting solidity that made her feel completely safe. He smelled faintly of cedarwood and fresh earth, a scent that was uniquely his and deeply reassuring. When he tilted his head and kissed her, Shelby felt her heart race. His lips were soft but firm, and his kiss was filled with a passion that sent heat coursing through her. Jeff pulled back just enough to look into her eyes, his expression both tender and fiery. You feel right, he said softly, loving all her curves, and you smell sweet, like the wildflowers on this land. Shelby smiled, her cheeks burning hot as she leaned into him. And you feel incredible, she whispered. The moment lingered, filled with an unspoken promise of more to come. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light across the lake, Shelby felt a deep sense of gratitude and hope for the future. Kirby High's senior prank with a twist. Shelby stood at the front of the high school's STEM lab, leaning casually against the teacher's desk as the students wrapped up their project presentations. The group of seniors, a mix of tech-savvy overachievers and shy but eager learners, had come a long way since Shelby started volunteering. Today, however, their enthusiasm seemed slightly dampened. "What's going on?" Shelby asked, noting their unusually subdued energy. "You're usually buzzing by this point in the session." Cassidy, one of the more outspoken students, sighed dramatically. "It's the senior prank. We can't come up with anything good." Another student, Aaron, chimed in. "Last year's seniors released 1,000 balloons in the gym. It was cool, but we want to do something different. We don't want to get in trouble, but we also don't want it to be lame." Shelby chuckled. "Well, you're lucky you have an IT mentor with a knack for harmless mischief." The students perked up, curiosity lighting their faces. "What do you mean?" asked Josh, a quiet student who had grown more confident under Shelby's guidance. Shelby grinned. "How about a prank that's clever, harmless, and showcases your IT skills, something that'll impress everyone without causing chaos?" She grabbed a marker and started writing on the whiteboard, explaining the Wi-Fi name takeover prank. "You'll create Wi-Fi hotspots and rename it to form a collective message. Something like, 'Thanks for 4 great years. Class of 2025 rocks.' You'll turn them on Monday morning before school starts, so anyone searching for Wi-Fi sees your message." The students exchanged excited glances. "That's genius," Cassidy said, her eyes wide. "It's funny, but it won't get us into trouble." "But wait," Aaron asked. "What about the final prank? We need a big finish for Friday." Shelby smirked. "We'll keep it IT themed, but add a twist. Let's set up a series of QR codes around the school that lead to clues, like a scavenger hunt. Some clues will lead to prizes for all the students. The big final clue can reveal a surprise for just the seniors, like a message about free gourmet pizza or sandwiches at Chaz's Eatery after school." The room buzzed with excitement as Shelby outlined the details. The students brainstormed how to execute the plan, and by the end of the session, they had a full strategy, including backup plans in case of technical hiccups. Monday morning, the Wi-Fi prank launched perfectly. As students and teachers connected their devices, they couldn't miss the playful message, "Thanks for 4 great years. Class of 2025 rocks." Laughter echoed through the halls as word spread. Even the principal, Mr. Lopez, admitted it was the most creative prank he'd seen in years. On Friday, the final prank took the school by storm. QR codes appeared in unexpected places, on lockers, bulletin boards, and even the school mascot's costume. Each code led to a clue, culminating in a message. "The class of 2025 loves Kirby High. We'll miss you. We gave you free prizes, and now we'll enjoy free pizza at Chaz's Eatery today after school." The school buzzed with excitement as students raced to find clues and solve the puzzles. Teachers and staff were impressed by the creativity and teamwork, and parents praised the seniors for pulling off such a positive and harmless prank. Many stopped Shelby in town over the weekend to thank her for encouraging their children's creativity and responsibility. That afternoon, Shelby met the senior class at Chaz's Eatery in the town square. Chaz had outdone himself, setting up tables laden with gourmet pizzas, sandwiches, and pitchers of lemonade and iced tea. The students sprawled out on the grass, laughing, eating, and reminiscing about their high school years. Shelby sat on a blanket with Chaz, watching the students enjoy themselves. "You're a hit," Chaz said, nudging her with his elbow. "Parents have been coming up to me all day, thanking me for this idea. I keep telling them it was all you." Shelby laughed. "It was the students' hard work. I just gave them a little nudge." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light over the square, Shelby felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Watching the students she'd mentored pull off something so creative and well received was a reminder of how much her life had changed and how much she had to give. Family ties and legal battles. Unfortunately, peace did not last for Shelby. Out of nowhere, she found herself blindsided by a legal notice. Victoria Harris, a cousin of her grandmother's she had never met, was suing for the land. Shelby stared at the papers in disbelief, her heart sinking. How could this happen now, after all she had worked for? Jeff was the first to notice her distress. "What's wrong?" he asked, setting down the tools he'd been carrying. Shelby handed him the notice, her voice shaking. "She's claiming the land should be hers. I didn't even know she existed until now." Jeff's brow furrowed as he read the document. "We'll figure this out. You're not alone in this." Shelby soon discovered that Victoria was not just filing a lawsuit. She was actively trying to tarnish Shelby's reputation. Local newspapers and online forums lit up with comments questioning whether Shelby had truly earned her success. Kyle, ever the opportunist, was even quoted in one piece, saying, "She was never interested in farming before she supposedly inherited the land. She's always been an IT girl, not a farmer." While technically true, Shelby knew Kyle was twisting the narrative to cast doubt on her accomplishments. Seeing the comments online was devastating. "What if people stop trusting me?" Shelby confided to Jeff one evening, her voice trembling. "What if they think I'm just some city girl who doesn't deserve any of this? This farm has become everything to me, and now it feels like someone is trying to take it all away again." Jeff pulled her into a hug. "You've worked harder than anyone to make this place what it is. The people who matter know that, and will prove it in court." Victoria's lawsuit hinged on the claim that the sale of the land over a century ago had been illegitimate. She argued that her great-grandfather had never intended to sell it permanently. Shelby's lawyers dug deep, scouring records and archives for proof that the sale had been above board. While they initially struggled to find concrete evidence, their breakthrough came when they uncovered the recorded bill of sale, an official document that had been misfiled decades ago. "This is the key," Shelby's lead attorney explained. "It's irrefutable proof that your family legally purchased the land. Now we just need to present it in court." As they prepared their case, they also found an old article from the local paper announcing the sale. The piece described a barbecue celebrating the transaction and included a photo of the two brothers shaking hands. It detailed how Victoria's great-grandfather had used the funds to open a factory and local business, a business that Victoria herself now owned. The weeks leading up to the trial were some of the most stressful of Shelby's life. She couldn't help but draw painful parallels between this ordeal and the unexpected upheavals she'd faced before. Losing her parents in a car accident, Kyle's sudden decision to end their marriage, and now this. Each time it felt like someone else's actions had upended her life, leaving her to pick up the pieces. "What if I lose the farm?" she whispered to Chaz during a late-night call. "I don't know what I'd do. It feels like everything I've built could be swept away just because someone else is resentful." Chaz's voice was firm but kind. "Shelby, you've got more fight in you than anyone I've ever met. You're not alone in this. We've got your back, no matter what happens." Her farm staff echoed the same sentiment, stepping up to keep the farm running smoothly so Shelby could focus on the case. Jeff remained a constant source of strength, always ready to offer a reassuring word or a comforting presence when she felt overwhelmed. When the day of the ruling finally arrived, Shelby sat in the courtroom, her hands gripping the edge of the table. The judge's decision was clear and decisive. The land belonged to Shelby. The bill of sale and accompanying article had dismantled Victoria's claims, leaving no room for doubt. Shelby's relief was overwhelming. She felt tears prick her eyes as she hugged Jeff and her attorneys. Victoria stormed out of the courtroom without a word, her face a mask of frustration. That evening, Shelby gathered her team, Jeff and Chaz by the lake to celebrate. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson as they raised their glasses. "This farm isn't just mine," Shelby said, her voice steady and full of gratitude. It belongs to all of us. Thank you for standing by me through this. Jeff squeezed her hand, his voice warm. We always will. As Shelby looked out over the lake, surrounded by the people who had supported her, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. No one would take this life from her again. Let's celebrate. The farm buzzed with life as Shelby hosted her biggest event yet, a grand harvest festival to celebrate 3 years of success. Guests wandered through rows of pumpkins, sampled fresh produce from colorful stalls, and danced to live music on a stage set up near the lake. The smell of roasted vegetables and freshly baked pies wafted through the air, mingling with the sound of laughter and the occasional cluck of a wandering chicken. Shelby stood at the edge of the crowd, taking it all in. The farm had never looked more beautiful, and her heart swelled with pride. She thought back to the day she first arrived, unsure of her future. Now, everything she saw was a testament to how far she'd come and how much she'd gained. Jeff was busy manning the cider stand, chatting with guests as he poured drinks from a wooden barrel. When Shelby approached, he handed her a cup with a grin. Freshly pressed, only the best for the queen of the farm. Shelby laughed, taking a sip. This is amazing. You're a cider expert now? I dabble, Jeff said, winking. Then, leaning closer, he added, I was thinking we could dedicate a new patch of land for an exclusive crop, maybe thorny blackberries? We'll call it Kyle's Patch. Shelby burst out laughing. Only if you promise to do the weeding. Deal, he said, his tone turning softer. Seriously, though, Shelby, this is incredible, and so are you. He gently pulled her close, his arms strong and warm around her. Before she could say anything, he pressed a kiss to her neck and whispered something playful and suggestive in her ear that made her cheeks heat up. Shelby giggled, glancing around to make sure no one could hear. Jeff Franklin, you're going to get me in trouble, she murmured. That's the goal, he said with a mischievous grin, brushing a kiss against her temple before heading back to the cider stand as a guest called his name. Chaz took center stage as the band finished their set. Grabbing a microphone, he tapped it dramatically to get everyone's attention. Ladies and gentlemen, let's hear it for Shelby Harris, the woman who turned a dusty old farm into the hottest spot in town. The crowd erupted in applause as Shelby blushed. Chaz wasn't done. And let's not forget her culinary partner in crime, me, the guy who finally escaped city kitchens to live the dream in Kirby. Shelby, I've said it before, but it bears repeating. You've turned this place into magic, and I'm lucky to be part of it. Cheers to you, my friend. Raising their glasses, the guests cheered again. Then Chaz turned toward the farmhouse, placing a hand on his hip. And let's not forget poor Bernice. Sorry, Bernice, old girl, but you know you were falling apart when Shelby got here. The guests erupted in laughter as Chaz bowed to the house as if it were alive, his exaggerated performance earning chuckles and applause. Shelby shook her head, laughing. Bernice forgives you, she called, making the guests laugh even more. Chaz gave her a playful wink before heading back to the kitchen tent to prepare dessert. Don't think this means I'm doing dishes later, he called over his shoulder. Shelby's farm staff and university students had outdone themselves organizing the festival. Mia presented Shelby with a framed photo of the farm taken at sunrise. We wanted to thank you for inspiring us, Mia said. Working here has been life-changing. Shelby's throat tightened with emotion. Thank you, all of you. This farm wouldn't be what it is without your hard work and passion. As the sun set, casting golden light over the lake, the festival wound down. Families gathered their children, couples swayed to the band's final song, and the air was filled with contented murmurs. Shelby found herself back on the porch, watching the scene while leaning into Jeff's solid body as he hugged her from behind. It's hard to believe this is real sometimes, she admitted, her voice soft. Jeff kissed her temple. It's real. You made it real, and it's just the beginning. They stood in companionable silence as the last guest departed, the stars appearing one by one in the night sky. Shelby squeezed Jeff's hand, her heart full. "Here's to the future," she said, her voice steady and sure. "To the future," Jeff echoed, his smile warm. And as Shelby looked out over her land, she knew it was more than a farm. It was her home, her legacy, and a future as bright as the stars above and as boundless as the land stretching ahead of her. Thank you for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe for more stories.